There is a war being fought right now that most Americans don't know they're losing. Not a war over territory, not a war over ideology, a war over the long-term fighting capacity of the United States military itself. And the enemy running it isn't firing at American cities. They're not targeting American civilians. They are targeting the machine, the $886 billion a year apparatus that American global power rests on, with a level of strategic patience and architectural sophistication that almost no one in mainstream media is stopping to explain. I want to be very direct with you about something before we go any further. This is not political commentary, and it is not a conspiracy theory. Every mechanism I am about to walk you through is documented. Sourced. On the record. What we are dealing with is a country that has spent 45 years being locked out of every conventional military advantage, and used that time to engineer something more dangerous than a conventional military. A plan specifically designed to break the American armed forces from the outside in, not by defeating them in battle, but by making them fight themselves into bankruptcy and exhaustion. Here is what makes this so difficult to see clearly. The plan doesn't look like a plan. It looks like chaos. It looks like an angry regime lashing out in multiple directions at once. Houthis attacking ships in the Red Sea. Militias rocketing American bases in Iraq. Proxy forces exchanging fire across the Lebanese border. Drone swarms over the Persian Gulf. The mainstream media covers each of those as a separate, unconnected story. And that fragmented coverage is exactly the reason most Americans cannot see what Iran is actually doing. Because when you step back far enough to see all of it together, what you're looking at is not chaos. What you are looking at is an integrated four-mechanism strategy, already activated, already running, aimed at one destination: a United States military so financially drained, so operationally exhausted, and so strategically overstretched that it loses the capacity to project power in the region that holds 20% of the world's daily oil supply. And what happens to that oil supply reaches directly into your gas pump, your grocery bill, and the retirement account you have spent your career building. So let's walk through it. Every mechanism, every number, no fluff. Before the four mechanisms, you need to understand the foundational logic that holds all of them together. There is a concept in military strategy called the cost imposition model. The idea is deceptively simple. If you cannot defeat your enemy in direct combat, you make the act of fighting you so expensive in money and equipment and political will that your enemy eventually decides the fight isn't worth the price tag. You don't have to win a single battle. You only have to make winning cost more than your enemy is willing to pay. America has actually run this exact playbook before. During the Cold War, the Reagan administration deliberately drew the Soviet military into a global arms race it couldn't afford to sustain. That financial pressure was one of the contributing factors to the collapse of the Soviet Union. Iran studied that strategy. They studied it carefully, and then they inverted it, built their own version of the cost imposition model, and pointed it directly at the Pentagon. The United States military budget for fiscal year 2024 was $886 billion, more than the next 10 countries combined. Here is what most people don't understand about that number. Raw spending advantage means almost nothing against an adversary that has engineered every element of their military doctrine specifically to make that spending irrelevant. Iran has spent 4 decades figuring out how to turn American military superiority into a liability, and they have found 4 mechanisms that do exactly that. Let me show you each one. Mechanism 1, the drone economy, making every dollar you spend worth 10 cents. Start with the most visible piece of this strategy, the Shahed 136 drone. Most Americans have seen footage of these, a propeller-driven machine with a crude navigation system and a warhead bolted to the nose. They look cheap because they are cheap. Each one costs between $35,000 and $50,000 to manufacture, roughly the price of a mid-range pickup truck. Now here is the number that actually matters. The American military's primary air defense interceptors, Patriot missiles and THAAD interceptors, cost between $1 million and $4 million per shot. A single Patriot PAC-3 missile, the latest variant, runs approximately $4 million per unit according to figures published by the Congressional Research Service in their 2024 Defense Procurement Report. And because these interceptors don't achieve a perfect kill rate in real combat conditions, military analysts at the Institute for the Study of War documented intercept scenarios that regularly required 2 to 3 missiles per incoming drone. The real-world cost of defending against a single $50,000 Shahed can run between $2 million and $12 million on the American side. Work through that math. $1 of Iranian offense requiring $40 to $240 of American defense. Multiply that across a sustained campaign involving thousands of engagements, and you start to understand why this isn't a military problem. It's a bankruptcy problem. Iran's production capacity makes the economics catastrophic. At documented peak production rates of 300 to 500 Shahed drones per day, figures corroborated by Ukrainian battlefield recovery data and intelligence assessments published by the Royal United Services Institute Institute in London, Iran can sustain drone campaigns indefinitely. Estimated stockpiles prior to the June 2025 strikes sat at approximately 80,000 units. Even after strikes on Shahid production facilities, the Royal United Services Institute assessed in July 2025 that Iran retained enough dispersed manufacturing capacity to reconstitute meaningful drone production within 60 to 90 days. You can bomb a factory. You cannot bomb the blueprint. Here is what this mechanism is actually doing to the American military at the institutional level. The United States currently has 1,822 Patriot interceptor missiles in its total inventory, according to 2024 Army budget justification documents. That sounds substantial until you hold it against the demand signal being generated by simultaneous conflicts in Ukraine, the Middle East, and Taiwan Strait tensions. The Wall Street Journal reported in October 2024 that American Patriot stockpiles had reached critically low levels after extended support to Ukraine. The Army is now requesting emergency supplemental funding to reconstitute those stockpiles. Funding that competes with every other military priority Congress is simultaneously being asked to address. Iran didn't empty those stockpiles directly. It created a global demand environment that did, and that is precisely the point of this mechanism. The deeper strategic effect here isn't any single engagement. It's exhaustion at the inventory level, the gradual hollowing out of the reserves that make sustained high-intensity warfare possible. Iran's drone economy is running that process every single day, whether or not a single American soldier is in direct combat. The second mechanism operates across multiple theaters simultaneously, and understanding it requires pulling back far enough to see the entire map at once. Iran has spent 4 decades building what it calls the Axis of Resistance, a network of allied militia forces deployed across Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and Gaza. Most American media coverage treats each of these groups as a separate local story. The Houthis attacking shipping in the Red Sea, Hezbollah exchanging fire across the Lebanon-Israel border, Iraqi Shia militias rocketing American bases at al-Assad and Ain al-Assad. These stories get reported in isolation, as if they are unrelated regional conflicts with separate causes and separate dynamics. That framing is exactly what Iran wants, because here is the operational reality. These are not separate stories. They are a single coordinated strategy being run from Tehran with one explicit objective: force the American military to sustain a global defensive posture across so many simultaneous theaters that it degrades its own readiness, burns through its maintenance budget, and exhausts its personnel faster than it can reconstitute them. Brian McKeon, who served as Deputy Secretary of Defense for Policy under Secretary Austin, testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee in March 2024 that American forces in the Middle East had faced more than 150 attacks from Iran-backed militia groups in the preceding 6 months. 150 attacks across Iraq, Syria, and Jordan. Every one of those attacks required a defensive response. Every defensive response consumed munitions, maintenance hours, fuel, and personnel attention that was simultaneously needed elsewhere. The attack on Tower 22 in Jordan in January 2024, which killed 3 American soldiers and wounded dozens more, was a direct product of this sustained pressure campaign. Not a random escalation, but the predictable output of a strategy designed to make American military presence in the region permanently costly. Now look at the financial signature. The Center for Strategic and International Studies published a detailed accounting in February 2024 of the direct military costs the United States had incurred defending against Houthi attacks on Red Sea shipping since October 2023. The USS Gravely and USS Carney together expended over $100 million in interceptor missiles in a single 10-hour engagement in October 2023 alone. Operation Prosperity Guardian, the American-led naval coalition deployed to protect Red Sea commercial traffic, was costing the Navy an estimated $1 billion per month in operational costs by Q1 2024, according to defense budget analysts at the Stimson Center. The Houthis were launching those attacks using anti-ship missiles and drones costing between $20,000 and $200,000 per unit. Let those numbers land properly. $1 billion per month to defend against weapons that cost $20,000 each. Here is the strategic logic that most analysts miss when they describe these proxy campaigns as failures, because they didn't stop American operations. Stopping American operations was never the goal. The goal is the ratio. Every Houthi missile salvo that cost the American Navy $100 million to intercept cost Iran approximately $2 million to authorize. Every Iraqi militia rocket attack that forces an American base into defensive lockdown costs Iran almost nothing. The proxy network is a machine for generating that cost ratio at scale across as many theaters as possible simultaneously and indefinitely. Thomas Spohr, a retired Army lieutenant general and director director of the Center for National Defense at the Heritage Foundation, described the cumulative effect precisely. The sustained multi-theater pressure campaign Iran is running through its proxies is designed to consume American precision munitions faster than the defense industrial base can replace them. The production timelines for Patriot interceptors, Tomahawk cruise missiles, and AIM-120 air-to-air missiles are measured in years, not months. Consumption timelines in active conflict are measured in days. Iran has engineered a situation where American military spending creates scarcity rather than security. Pull up a map because this piece requires you to see the geometry clearly. The American military presence in the Middle East is organized around a series of major installations. Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, Naval Support Activity Bahrain, Ali Al Salem Air Base in Kuwait, Al Dhafra Air Base in the UAE, Al Asad Air Base in Iraq, and multiple smaller facilities scattered across the region. These bases were designed during an era when the primary threat was a conventional military force that could be deterred by visible American power projection. They were built to impress, to signal commitment, to make any conventional adversary recalculate the cost of direct conflict. They were not built to withstand what Iran has now deployed against them. Every single one of those installations sits within range of Iranian ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, or proxy-launched rocket artillery. The International Institute for Strategic Studies assessed in its 2024 Military Balance Report that Iran operates the largest ballistic and cruise missile arsenal in the Middle East, more than 3,000 systems of various ranges. The Shahab-3, with a range exceeding 2,000 kilometers, can reach American bases in Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and the UAE from launch sites inside Iranian territory. The Fateh, 110, and Zulfiqar series, shorter-range precision systems Iran has transferred to Iraqi militia partners, can reach those same bases from launch sites in western Iraq, which puts them within range before American early warning systems have time to generate a useful intercept solution. Now here is the compounding problem with the geographic position Iran occupies. The United States cannot simply relocate these bases. They are the infrastructure of American power projection in the region. Walking away from Al Udeid means walking away from the air operations hub that supports every mission from the Persian Gulf to Central Asia. Walking away from Naval Support Activity Bahrain means walking away from the headquarters of the Fifth Fleet, the naval force responsible for freedom of navigation in the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea, and the Arabian Sea. These are not convenient forward positions that can be shifted to safer ground. They are the irreplaceable architecture of American military presence in the most strategically important energy corridor on the planet. What Iran has done is spend decades constructing a targeting solution for every one of those irreplaceable installations, and then demonstrated willingness to use it. The October 2022 strike on Ain al-Assad Air Base by Iranian-backed militia forces, which wounded 110 American service members according to Department of Defense reports, was not a one-time event. It was a demonstration of capability designed to communicate one thing with absolute clarity. No American base in this region is beyond reach, and the cost of maintaining this presence will be paid in blood and equipment on a timeline Iran controls. Michael Knights, a senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy who has spent 2 decades studying Iranian proxy operations, described the geographic strategy in terms that strip away any ambiguity. Iran has constructed a situation where American forces are permanently on the defensive across a theater they cannot vacate against threats that can be replenished faster than American defenses can be reconstituted. That is not a military stalemate. That is a slow-motion siege. The fourth mechanism is the one that gets the least coverage and carries the most long-term consequence, and it operates entirely inside the American military itself. Here is a number that should stop you cold. As of the Army's fiscal year 2024 budget submission, only 66% of Army brigade combat teams were assessed as fully ready for high-intensity combat operations. The Air Force reported in its 2023 readiness review that mission-capable rates for the F-35A, America's most advanced tactical aircraft, sat at approximately 55%. The Navy's surface combatant fleet reported in GAO testimony to Congress in February 2024 that maintenance backlogs had reached 48 warships simultaneously requiring depot-level repair, the largest such backlog in decades. Now here is the honest answer about what is driving those numbers. For decades of sustained operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and across the broader Middle East have consumed American military equipment, personnel, and institutional attention at a rate the peacetime defense budget was never designed to sustain. Deployments are longer. Maintenance cycles are compressed. Retention is under pressure because the people inside the military are exhausted in ways that recruiting bonuses cannot fully address. The Army missed its recruiting target by 10,000 soldiers in fiscal year 2023, the worst recruiting shortfall since the institution of the all-volunteer force in 1973. Iran did not cause all of those problems directly, but Iran designed a strategy that systematically makes every one of them worse. Every proxy attack that forces an American base into defensive posture for 72 hours is 72 hours of maintenance that doesn't happen, 72 hours of training that gets postponed, 72 hours of sleep that service members don't get, multiplied across 150 attacks in 6 months, multiplied across a decade of sustained pressure. The cumulative effect on readiness is not visible in any single engagement. It shows up in the GAO report. It shows up in the maintenance backlog. It shows up in the recruiting numbers. Mark Kanchan, a senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies and a retired Marine Corps colonel who oversaw strategic force planning, described the underlying dynamic with precision that the public rarely hears. He observed in congressional testimony in October 2023 that the United States military is currently attempting to sustain a global defensive posture, support 2 active theater partners simultaneously, maintain deterrence in the Pacific, and reconstitute depleted munition stockpiles, all within a budget framework that was sized for a different strategic environment. The force is not broken, but it is being asked to do more than its current structure supports, and the gap between demand and capacity is growing, not shrinking. That gap is the target. Iran doesn't need to defeat the American military in a single decisive engagement. It needs to widen that gap between what the military is being asked to do and what it has the resources and personnel to sustain, until the gap becomes a political problem that Congress cannot ignore and the American public is no longer willing to fund. History tells us that process has a name. America went through it in Vietnam. It went through it in Afghanistan. In both cases, the military never lost a major conventional engagement. In both cases, the cost imposition strategy of the adversary eventually produced a political decision to withdraw. Iran is running that same playbook with more patience and more architectural sophistication than either previous adversary managed. Now step back and look at what these 4 mechanisms form together. The drone economy depletes American munition stockpiles faster than the defense industrial base can replenish them, converting America's spending advantage into a structural scarcity problem. The proxy tax forces the American military into a permanent multi-theater defensive posture that consumes readiness, equipment, and personnel attention across more simultaneous fronts than the force was sized to sustain. The geographic stranglehold traps American forward presence inside a targeting envelope Iran has spent decades constructing, making the cost of maintaining that presence permanently non-zero and permanently on Iran's terms. And the readiness drain compounds all 3 mechanisms by widening the gap between what the military is asked to do and what it structurally has the capacity to do, until that gap becomes a political verdict, not just a military problem. Each mechanism reinforces the others in ways that matter. The proxy tax generates the operational tempo that accelerates the readiness drain. The geographic stranglehold makes the proxy tax more effective because American forces cannot relocate outside the targeting envelope without abandoning the strategic terrain they are there to protect. The drone economy makes the readiness drain worse by consuming the interceptor stockpiles that are also needed for the higher-end conflict that American planners know is the real long-term risk. And all 4 mechanisms are funded in significant part by the $31.2 billion in annual oil revenue flowing from Chinese purchases of Iranian crude, a financial lifeline that American sanctions have failed to sever. This is a system, and systems are substantially harder to defeat than individual tactics or individual actors. The honest assessment here requires acknowledging what this strategy cannot do and what it can. Iran cannot destroy the American military through any of these 4 mechanisms. The United States has reserves of equipment, personnel, and industrial capacity that exceed anything Iran can exhaust in any near-term time frame. The $886 billion budget, the nuclear arsenal, the carrier strike groups, the global alliance network, none of that disappears because of drone economics or proxy attacks or readiness backlogs. What this strategy can do, what it is specifically designed to do, is impose a cost on maintaining American military presence in the Middle East that gradually exceeds what the American political system is willing to pay. Not in dollars alone, in lives, in equipment, in public attention, in political capital. The Congressional Budget Office and the Government Accountability Office have both flagged in recent reports that sustaining current operational tempo in the Middle East while simultaneously recapitalizing depleted munition stockpiles and maintaining Pacific deterrence is not financeable within current budget projections without significant trade-offs. Those trade-offs are the strategic objective. Iran isn't trying to win a war against America. It is trying to make America's political leadership conclude, as they concluded in Vietnam, as they concluded in Afghanistan, understand that the price of staying is higher than the price of leaving. And if America leaves the Middle East, the petrodollar system that has underpinned American economic dominance since the 1970s faces its most serious structural threat since it was constructed. That is not an abstraction. That is your dollar. That is your retirement account. That is the cost of every import sitting on every shelf in every store you walk into. Which is why understanding this strategy isn't just for military analysts and foreign policy professionals. It is the starting point for understanding the most consequential economic and security dynamic of the next decade. Let's run through this one final time cleanly. Mechanism 1. The drone economy. Iran manufactures Shahid drones at between $35,000 and $50,000 per unit, forcing the American military to expend interceptors costing $1 million to $4 million each, a cost ratio of $1 of Iranian offense to $40 or more of American defense, running across thousands of engagements simultaneously. Mechanism 2. The proxy tax. Iran's axis of resistance forces the American military into sustained multi-theater defensive operations costing an estimated $1 billion per month in the Red Sea theater alone, consuming precision munitions at rates the American defense industrial base cannot replenish on operationally relevant timelines. Mechanism 3. The geographic stranglehold. Every major American military installation in the Middle East sits within range of Iranian ballistic missiles or proxy launch systems, trapping American forward presence inside a permanent targeting envelope that cannot be vacated without surrendering the strategic terrain that American power projection in the region depends on. Mechanism 4. The readiness drain. Sustained multi-theater operational pressure, compounded by munitions scarcity and personnel exhaustion, is systematically widening the gap between what the American military is asked to sustain and what its current structure can support, setting up a political verdict on continued Middle East engagement that Iran has been working toward for 45 years. For mechanisms, one destination, and all for a running simultaneously right now. Share this with someone you care about, because understanding what's actually happening to American military power in this region is not an academic exercise. It is the foundation for every serious conversation about energy prices, economic stability, and the long-term security environment that every decision you make about your finances and your family's future rests on.